Welcome into 19 on the Clock, your Tri-State High School and College Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Pushkar, along with my co-host, Jackson McCarty. Jackson, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing even better knowing what we have on deck here.
I know, this is a fun day of high school playoffs, high school football playoffs continuing. We're going to be talking a little bit about how the college football landscape is shaping out, and we're going to have a special guest as well.
We are.
So looking forward to that. Let's kick things off, though, with some local football.
Yes.
We've got Harrison facing off with LaSalle as Ohio playoffs continue.
Yeah. So this one's really fun because I would say Harrison is probably my second or third most exposed team since I've been here. So over, this is my second football season in the Tri-State. I've been to a handful of Harrison games. I know that Cole Coops, their running back, is one of the best running backs in the Tri-State, hands down. Every time I go there, it feels like he gets 2 touchdowns and at least 100 yards. And to be honest, that is kind of his average stat line throughout the year. And then on the other side, LaSalle, they're only 2 losses of the year. Been to GCL teams or GCL South teams. They've just been a really impressive team to this point. Their defense has gotten a lot of shine. Their quarterback has been pretty impressive. Overall, a really, really interesting matchup between 2 conferences, the SWOC, GCL South. You don't really get to see a whole lot of interaction there.
No, and that's kind of the beauty of playoffs, where you can actually see teams that don't play during the regular season as much, or maybe don't have as much of a history playing each other, finally match up and really show who's boss.
Right, and this one is just really exciting. So Harrison, to this point in the season, they beat Troy 43-7 week 1 in the playoffs, then beat Xenia 45-28 last week. They're averaging about 250 yards allowed per game, which will be an interesting one to watch. I've already mentioned Cole Coops, Dickie Engel. Their pass game functions pretty well. Engel has over 2,000 pass yards, 30 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. So they're not a singular point of attack. Like for example, 2 weeks ago, Dickie Engel threw for over 304 touchdowns to get them over the hump against Troy. And then last week, Coops had, let me see, I've got those numbers, 205 and 3 total touchdowns. So, 1 week it was quite literally, we're leaning all the way into this passing attack. The next week, they go back to old reliable. So you don't really see very many dynamic offenses at this level. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, a lot of times when you see a team that is depending on running backs or even a mobile quarterback, they just stick with that.
Yes.
But to go back and forth and throw defenses off, I think that that can really pay off. Will LaSalle's defense be able to prepare for both sides of the attack?
I don't know if I'm definitely focused more on their run game because Cole Coops is just that constant fear, I guess, for a defensive coordinator. But throughout the season, their only losses are to Moeller, 38-0, St. X, 9-0. With how we know how talented that St. X offense is, with Herb Street and Vollmer. So to hold them to 9, that's probably your closest comparison. Which does give you a lot of optimism there. Their differential on the season, 310-200. And then, you kind of mentioned a reliance on a dual-threat quarterback is kind of that more traditional. That's what you're going to get from LaSalle. Their quarterback, Pat McLaughlin, about 1,200 pass yards, give or take, about 600 rush yards. He's not quite been as efficient as you'd like. About 11 total touchdowns, 13 total turnovers. In the playoffs so far, you haven't really seen that run game get moving near as much, but he does have 4 pass touchdowns to 1 pick. So he's cleaned it up a little bit as we start to move on. Just a matter of if the Wildcats can kind of start to force up some of those issues again.
Now, one thing we had talked about last week, I forget which game it was, but it was a quarterback that wasn't keeping, that was fumbling fairly often.
Yes.
I looking over your notes. He has 1 rushing touchdown, 2 fumbles. Does the ability to keep his hand on the ball up against this Harrison team, does that worry you as they go into it?
Yeah, I think it's a fair concern to have walking into this one. And if LaSalle is going to lose this game, I think it's probably going to be because of that turnover battle. I think that their offense can do enough, and I think their defense can keep it within range. So obviously it's all going to come down to who can perform the cleanest in those close moments. I have a lot more faith that Dickie Engle and Cole Coops are going to get through without a turnover or without some big costly ordeal, where LaSalle still kind of has to prove that to me.
Okay. Great.
Yeah. It's an easy one, but this is going to be one of the closer ones on the slate. Now, where we're at this point in the season, they're all going to be close.
Yes. And I think that's the thing, is that we've talked so much these past few weeks about games where you may have a team that's like, they're undefeated and they're going to stay undefeated,
exactly.
Or this team has a large mountain to overcome. These games feel a lot closer. That it is very much a nuance of, well, if this one player does really well, that could push them over versus the other side.
100%. Well, and we try to do these, at least on the high school side, to keep this from being a 3-4 hour ordeal. We try to make it, the 5 best games. Yes. That's part of why I had to leave Anderson and Mount Healthy out this week, not because I don't think the Owls are really good, or not because I'm not super excited for Jameer Spain versus Justice Burnham, but Anderson has not let anybody be particularly close this year.
Yes.
So we're still, in terms of, those are two really good teams, but they still can't get on this short list just because of the value of the competition that we have still going.
Yeah, and so let's move on to our next game then.
Yep.
Lakota West versus St. X.
Yes.
We just mentioned St. X, I think, a little bit ago with LaSalle. Obviously, the big name has been Herb Street.
Yes.
Both just in terms of play and just in terms of fame around the area.
Of course.
You got to give it up to him. Like, hey, he's living up to expectations, I think.
Absolutely, and he's been one of those guys that it hasn't always been pretty. And while I can kind of get on McLaughlin for having a couple more turnovers than I'd like, I'm very much the same for Herb Street. Mm-hmm. But you also have so many dynamic plays on tape from him that show exactly why those turnovers, he comes back from them almost every time. When you're looking at his numbers here, he had a great passing game versus Milford a couple weeks ago, 13 for 18, 230, 3 touchdowns, no picks, but he's been limited on the ground so far. Had negative 10 rushing yards against Milford, 52 against Winton Woods. Now, Winton Woods' defense, 52 is actually probably one of the higher totals they've let up this year. Mm-hmm. But for Herb Street and what we're used to him, 42 yards in 2 games, that's nothing. That's...
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm sure he has more games on the season where he has above that total than under it. And that's across 2 games. So definitely keeping an eye on there. And then his running back that he'll kind of lean on, Daniel Vollmer, I mentioned him earlier as well. He has 138 yards on 27 carries and a touchdown through the playoffs so far. So again, not quite the numbers you would expect from their backfield, especially if Herb Street is being held to 42 across those games. Under 200 for your star backfield, less than 100 per game from those two, not quite what you're expecting. I do expect those numbers to start climbing back up again this week, though.
Do you feel that this going into this, just looking at it on paper, it leans in favor of St. X over West, or does West have something that can answer? So
last week I thought Winton Woods was the better team between them and St. X. I'm not going to hide that. I thought that the Winton defense is one of the top 3 in the state.
Yes.
But despite the fact that the numbers weren't quite where you want them, St. X still got that win. So I struggle at this point anymore to put St. X behind very many teams, besides like the Andersons and the Moellers of the world.
Yeah.
So I would lean that St. X would be my so-and-so favorite in this game, but it's always just such a wild gamble with them.
Okay. Yeah, and they did start the year playing West.
Yes.
Obviously, there's been plenty of weeks in between then. And I think maybe that can also give them a boost where we've seen this team before. We know what they do. They played them close, 17-13.
Yep.
I do think that could make a difference.
Well, and I think the momentum now, like St. X has proven to themselves that they can win close or they can win big. Mm-hmm. And that is, sometimes you can know the quality of your team before you step on the field, but you don't actually know that you can make it happen until you see it happen.
Yes.
And I think that mental shift that comes with that is going to be maybe the biggest factor in this game to making it different from that early season matchup.
Okay. Well, that'll be a fun one to watch. Definitely one to keep your eye on if you're heading out this Friday. Let's move across the river and through the woods over to Kentucky. St. X from Louisville,
yes, playing
Ryle. I don't think we've talked much about the Tigers, St. X Tigers. For fans that maybe have only been able to see high school games in our area, what is there to look out for Ryle heading into this?
So the big focus for me from this game, I actually got to see St. X, or I want to say St. X played Elder like early this year, and I got to be at I was at a game very early for Elder.
Yes.
But when you get this far into the season, it's hard to keep track of all of it. That said,
don't worry, I understand.
100%. But that said, 7-4 is nothing to scoff at. They beat Simon Kenton 48-13 last week. We had the highlights of that on Final Quarter.
Yes.
And then earlier this year, playing Ryle, a team that's gone 10-2, this is one of their losses. They beat them 31-24 at the early stages of the season. So while that record might not quite be as prestigious or as nice looking as Ryle's is, they are part of the reason that Ryle didn't go perfect.
Yes.
So,
which again, as we were just saying, with a rematch like this, it's we always talk about, especially in when you look at college basketball, where a lot of teams play each other twice in conference. It's hard to beat a team once. It's even harder to beat them twice, and almost impossible to beat them 3 times if you see them in the tournament. Things like that.
Right.
So as you are going, as Ryle is going into this game, do you think that they have grown enough from the start of the year to today where this matchup is going to be
I'd say
good for
so.
them?
I think a lot of the Kentucky high school football ranks this year, it's been pretty strange. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like some of those teams that you expect at the top haven't been there. It's been a very fluid situation, but one of the very few teams that has stayed near that upper echelon the whole way through has been Ryle. Quarterback Nathan Virax is a big reason. Now, these numbers do not include the playoffs. These are just the regular season digits. 7,200 pass yards, 450 on the ground, 26 total touchdowns to 10 interceptions. It's not been, one of those possible, state player of the year kind of seasons, but it's definitely been enough to get the job done over there. You've also got Jacob Savage, the running back, over 850 rush yards, gets you over 1,000 all-purpose with his receiving added to it. 17 rush touchdowns, 4 in the air. So, 20 total there, or 21 total. Also a freak on defense. 100 tackles, 2 sacks, 8 tackles for loss.
That's solid numbers.
Yeah, I mean, a guy that you have to put together 2 individual game plans on for offense and then for defense. You don't, even in high school level, you don't really see those that often, even though you still get those two-way players. It's hard to be as impactful on both sides of the game as he has been so far. So I would say that he's the big guy to watch here, just because of that ability to get involved both ways.
Well, he'll be my guy of the week.
There you go.
I love a good two-way player, and especially if you can make an impact while being a two-way player on both sides. That's just beautiful.
Just to have the energy to have 1,000 all-purpose on offense and 100 tackles on defense,
and still be like, hey, I'll just go crash into a guy.
I'd get through one game of his workload and be like, okay, that was my season. You know what I mean? I've got to have the next 9 weeks to recover here, and then maybe you can get me back for playoff time. But Jacob Savage has been, the image, the spitting image of his last name all season long.
We'll get you a good ice bath. Don't worry.
There we go.
Got the recovery ready for you.
Anybody got a cryo chamber I can borrow? And then so that's our Spotlight Kentucky game for this week out in Indiana. We've only got, we have Batesville as well, but we also have East Central that's still rolling forward in the Tri-State for the playoffs. They've got Decatur Central this week. And I want to do a quick recap of what I got to see last week whenever I went out to EC. So I went to the Lawrenceville game first, excuse me, where Batesville looked really good, and it was, I believe, 14-0 when I left at half. So I get over to East Central right before halftime ends, or right before the first half ends, rather. They miss a field goal. It's 0-0.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so I'm like, okay, it's a good thing because I didn't really miss too much to get shots of.
Yes.
They get set up. The first offensive drive by Franklin Community. There we go. Sorry. The punt goes over their head. East Central recovers it like 15, 20 yards away from the end zone. And then Ryan Minguez kind of punches one in. Okay. Reset, they punt again. Second offensive drive of the half. Ryan Minguez runs it 68 yards the other way, touchdown. So 2 touchdowns in like 3 minutes of actual gameplay. The first 2 scores, period, and that just kind of speaks volumes to how talented Ryan Minguez is.
Yes, I was going to say, you gave me flashbacks to when I would go out on Friday night football games. If you got 2 scores and you were like, oh, I still have another game to go to, you get those 2 scores in 3 minutes, you're like, yes, I can go get the other highlights now.
I had the missed field goal, I had the punt going over the punter's head, and then those 2 scores. I saw another couple people that were out there covering the game, and they said, are you already leaving? I go, Minguez done gave me too much video to cut already. I can't stay. You know what I mean? He made it far too easy on me. But, on the inverse, he makes life for the defense just incredibly hard.
Yes.
Because with that 68-yard run, I'm sure we have video playing on it right now or whereabouts. You can see, like, it's a pretty congested set. He's trying to run through this middle, and he just kind of appears. There was no stopping him. There was no containing him. You can't really chop him down. He's just getting free.
If I may make a comparison to a professional player,
yeah.
Is it like a Derrick Henry vibe?
No, because he's got a decent amount of speed, and he's not near as big as Derrick Henry.
Okay.
But he still has that power and that ability to get loose.
Yes.
To be honest, I can't even think of somebody that kind of draws that comparison. I just know that he's really good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he's one of those players that I hadn't gotten to see this point in the year, but I'm really glad that I have now.
Okay, good. And what games are you going to this week?
So I actually don't know. I believe I'm down in Kentucky somewhere. Okay. I know it's not on this list this week. I'm at the Scott County game.
Okay.
With Ryle and Cam O'Hara.
There you go.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun.
Somebody you guys have heard us talk about as well. But we're not done with the high school coverage just yet.
No, we're not. You picked this one out. Mm-hmm. This is a old rivalry returns. Moeller and Princeton, and you sat down with sports director Joe Danneman to talk about the history of this game and what people can be looking out for. So let's take a listen to that.
All right, you heard me and Brad talking about all the high school football games that we'll be covering this Friday. I've got Joe D joining me here to talk about an especially big one in the Tri-State. Joe,
yes.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm ready for. This is when it feels like the season starts. Now, I would say last week,
yes,
when we started seeing some of those regional quarterfinal matchups, the GCL against the GMC, when you get those kind of games, that's when it feels like the high school football playoffs really start. From here on out, it's good on good the rest of the way. And this is, when you talk about Cincinnati high school football history, this one hits Cincinnati right in its feels because it's Princeton, it's Moeller, and they're what Cincinnati high school football is built on.
Oh, 100%. And like I was texting with Austin Brisky trying to get the lineup for the podcast all sorted on Monday, and it's gotten to that point in the season, you're right, where I'm like, oh, do I include this one? But that's going to be a really good game.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned it earlier, but not being able to include the Justice Burnham versus Jameer Spain game kind of broke my heart a little bit because that's going to be one of the better quarterback battles that we'll get to see all year. But this game that we're focusing on today, Princeton and Moeller, like you mentioned, a massive rivalry game, but it's one we've already gotten to see at this point in the year.
They played week one, and we were talking about this leading up to it, and of course, week one, it was part of the Skyline Chili Crosstown Showdown. They had Pat Mancuso and Jerry Faust's son meet before the game because of the Moeller-Princeton rivalry. With Jerry's unfortunate passing this week, it's kind of almost poetic that they're playing this game this week after Jerry Faust's passing. But all history aside, these are two of the best teams in Cincinnati. We always call it the mythical Cincinnati Championship, and that's typically the regional championship game that's next week. And I do think Lakota West deserves to be number 2 in Cincinnati. In anybody's rankings, they've earned that. I think they're the number 2 team in Cincinnati at this point. But what we get with Moeller and Princeton in a rematch of Week 1, Princeton has their work cut out for them because of Moeller's offense and what they did. You go back to Week 1, Matt Ponatoski, who's had, I think, should be in consideration for Mr. Football in Ohio. Threw for 400 yards, 4 touchdowns in that game. He's got 44 touchdowns this season, over 3,000 passing yards. Still has a senior year ahead of him next year. He's had an outstanding year, and it feels like Princeton has their hands full. Now, there is a path here for Princeton to win this game that we'll get into as we go on, but just lining it up right now, Moeller's definitely the favorite in this game. Moeller has earned the right to be called the number 1 team in the city, and I think the number 1 team in the state. But upsets happen, and there's a way upsets happen, and I think there is a path for Princeton to pull off the upset on Friday night.
And like you said, we'll jump into that here in a minute, but I want to focus, since you brought up Ponatoski. You've gotten to see highlights upon highlights of his this year, a couple in live and living color. Where does this season rank in terms of some of the great seasons of ball you've seen out here?
See, the interesting thing is we've seen players who have had higher volume of stats just based on their offense. You look up any quarterback who's played at Western Brown the last 10, 15 years, they're going to put up bigger stats than Matt Ponatoski just because of the offense they run. But as far as efficiency and on the level he's playing at, when I say level he's playing at, I said the competition he's going against. And I think that's important here. It's almost like a weighted GPA in high school. There's a lot of kids who get a 4.0, but what classes are they taking?
Are you right here?
Yeah. Are you getting the 4.0 while taking all honors classes and AP classes? That's what Matt Ponatoski's done. So if he had a weighted GPA, it'd be like a 4.5 or a 5.0 because of the way he's playing against the competition he's going against. To me, it's the efficiency, right? It's the fact that Moeller isn't just a passing team. They also run the ball. But at the same time, for him to put up the numbers he has, he's got weapons. He gets the ball to his weapons. He pushes the ball down the field. But it's the efficiency of with what he does it at, playing quarterback at Moeller, that makes them feel like they could win a state championship. Quite honestly, I think they should win a state championship this year. They've been knocking on that door, 3 straight regional titles, going for 4 this year, but they haven't finished it. And it feels like this is the team that's ready to finish it with him at quarterback, even though, again, he's only a junior.
So flip it over there to the Vikings side. I know Tarantino, their running back, has been a superstar. What have you seen from him this year?
He's gotten healthy.
Yes.
That was the thing. I ran into his mom, actually, earlier this week, and we were talking about his season. I think in the last 4 games, he has over 500 yards and 6 touchdowns. And I asked, what's been the spark? She said he's just finally gotten healthy. And that's been what's most important for him and his production here late in the season. And he's a difference maker, right? And again, you start talking about the path for Princeton to win it, and he's one of those markers where you can play keep away, where you can have ball control, where you can limit Moeller's possessions. If Tarantino Brown Freeman can have another one of his games that he's had, and he's been over 100 yards and a couple of touchdowns here for multiple weeks in a row, then you're starting to talk about the blueprint for Princeton to pull off the upset. And he's been huge for them. We know about the quarterback, D'Angelo Birch, has been great all season long. But the emergence of TBF, his mom calls him Tino, the emergence of Tino here the last month has been a huge difference maker for Princeton. I really do think he's part of what has to be the blueprint for them to pull off the upset against Moeller. He's got to be productive. They've got to move the chains. They've got to hold on to the football and limit the number of touches Matt Ponatoski and that offense gets from Moeller.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you'll be able to catch your highlights of this game as well as all the other ones we've talked about on the final quarter. We're at 10:30 on 19-3,
right.
And then after, I don't even know what football game we've got on Friday.
It's a cool thing for us to have the streaming platform.
Yes.
Because college football on Fox has kind of forced us all over the map with where we're going with the final quarter. But to have that consistently every week at 10:30 has been great for us. And we'll find out that night if the blueprint that I think for Princeton to pull off this upset can happen. You want the other part of it?
Yeah.
Turnovers.
Yep.
The only way they're beating Moeller is that they force multiple turnovers. This is a team that can do it. They've forced 25 turnovers this season. I think if you go back and check the stats, Princeton has 5 defensive touchdowns. P.J. Nelson. Okay, so let me tell you a story about P.J. Nelson, okay?
Yeah.
So Andre Parker came into studio before the season started. We did the top 19 on 19. And he saw where P.J. Nelson was ranked. I think he was in the middle teens.
Okay.
And Andre pulled me aside and jokingly, I think, was not happy with where P.J. Nelson was. And he thanked me for it. He said, "You guys just created a monster."
I was about to say, I'm sure he's thanking you, or he's actually pretty jokey about it now because he knew where his guy should
Go
be.
back and look at the stats now. He leads the GMC in tackles. He has more than 20 tackles for loss, a handful of sacks. He's going to IU, which is now a top 5 football team. So P.J. Nelson and that defense, that's the blueprint. They've got to force Moeller into turnovers. Moeller's got to make a mistake or two for Princeton to have a shot in this game.
Which, and while Ponatoski has been the king of efficiency, still, like you said, a little bit younger, might be a little bit more prone to those.
Of course, and a big game, a big spot here, right? I think anybody sitting up here with a microphone on would pick Moeller in this game.
Yeah.
Moeller's a favorite, they should be, and I think Moeller will win this game. But the blueprint and the path for Princeton is ball control offense with Tarantino, Brown, Freeman. D'Angelo Birch make a handful of plays, which he's capable of doing, and then this defense turn Moeller over. They've got to do it. They've got to create short fields. They've got to get Moeller off the field. They've got to get Moeller rattled somehow. And the only way to rattle a team is when the season's on the line, to start forcing turnovers and really get this team out of their comfort zone. To me, that's the blueprint for Princeton upsetting Moeller on Friday night.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, we really appreciate you coming in, man.
Have me back.
Absolutely.
This was fun. I enjoyed it. Yeah, anytime you want me to come in here and chat about high school football, I'm yours.
We'll make it happen.
Yeah.
And well, and basketball season's coming up, too, so we'll have plenty to talk about.
Listen, I've got a son playing high school basketball in the Tri-State, so I can go on all day long about Tri-State high school basketball. I see these kids play all the time. It's not just during season. I see them out of season when they're playing AAU, so I know pretty much all there is to know about high school
Well, you play pickup with them at the Y for the most part, too. So
I don't know if you can see it here. I have a big bruise on my nose from playing basketball against teenagers last week. I took a shot right to the nose, and I said, well, that's it.
Did you get the charge at least? Or?
No. In fact, they blamed me for it. I said, no, wait, I have a bloody nose and a bruised nose, and I'm getting blamed for playing too hard of defense. They called me Unk. They said, you're playing too much defense. I said, well, this might be the time I hang it up because I got to protect the merchandise for TV.
Yeah, I think the Reeboks have to go on the shelf for the time being.
I like that, yeah.
Thanks again.
Yeah, you got it.
All right, and that wraps up our coverage ahead of Friday. Obviously, we also have Saturdays to cover, being your high school and college sports podcast. And the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot more of our local teams, or just the general area teams, not be playing. Miami is playing Tuesday this week, or played Tuesday this week.
Right.
We are recording this before.
On Tuesday, yeah.
They're playing on Wednesday.
Tuesday,
they're playing on Wednesday. Okay. I should correct myself. They're playing on Wednesday, but we're recording this before that game. They're playing against Kent State. This will be out after that game, though.
As much as I love action, it does kind of throw a wrench.
It throws us off, but you know what? I still enjoy watching it on a Tuesday and Wednesday night.
Of course.
Good for me. Ohio State is going to be playing Northwestern. To me, the interesting thing about that is that they're going to be playing at Wrigley because that's how Northwestern is closing out their season at home. I think it very much feels like a game Ohio State should win and likely will win, especially after last week where Ohio State fans were worried despite Purdue never scoring once, which was an interesting one. I loved my dad being like, "Oh, they're playing them closer than I thought they were." I'm like, "They're getting blown out. What are you talking about?"
That's a testament to how bad people thought that game was going to be.
Yes, absolutely. And but let's talk about a game that I am excited about, and it's going to be right here on Fox 19. That is UC and Iowa State. This is a good one for me this week. Big 12 is kind of in a weird spot in terms of standings. UC is 3-3 in conference right now. Iowa State is 4-2 in conference. There's 4 other teams that are 4-2 in conference right now, and then 2 more that are 4-3 because they've already played another conference game.
Right.
So as much as it feels like BYU is likely going to win this week. They're playing Kansas. That'll lock them in for at least a piece of the pie. There's still ways that all this can change, and it starts with this UC game. Now, obviously, you and I have talked every week, I feel like, about Brendan Sorsby.
Yes.
And how much we love him.
Rightfully so.
And I don't want to keep beating that dead horse.
No.
But that is, I do think this will be a good test for Cincinnati this week. They played West Virginia and won fairly handedly. This game is projecting a little closer than I think fans would want it to be.
Yes.
Right now, Iowa State is lines open, I should say, at 7.5 in favor of Iowa State.
Okay.
I think that's a pretty fair amount.
Yeah, that feels reasonable.
Going on college football graphs, college football insiders, their projections using advanced statistics have Iowa State scoring about 29.5, Cincinnati scoring about 24.5. So about a 5-point difference. I do think that this game will come down to a touchdown.
Yes.
That is what this feels like. Matt Campbell has been a solid coach for the Cyclones.
Now I know that this isn't our. Matt Campbell has been one of those names that gets mentioned a lot in coaching searches over the years, even whenever his record doesn't really justify it. This feels like finally one of those teams that you see why he's in those conversations.
Well, yeah, and I think the big thing with him is his name gets mentioned because his name was mentioned so often.
Right.
When he was at Toledo before he came to Iowa State, that he was that guy that was like, where is he going to make the jump from the MAC to?
Yeah.
Right now, it does feel a little bit. We'll talk about this in a second, but the Big Ten, the SEC feel like the conferences right now.
The Power Two.
You look at the playoff rankings, and I think it's 4 teams from the Big Ten: Ohio State, Oregon, IU, Penn State.
Yep. And
in the SEC, it's been Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, and Tennessee.
Right.
That is 8 of the 12 spots. And then you still have an ACC champion, a Big 12 champion, and then you have Boise State.
Right. Or presuming they take the G5. Whatever.
Presuming they continue to take the G5, but
Yes.
but you're looking at when you're looking at it right now. That's one more team. That's one team left.
Yes.
And so, I think right now those 2 conferences feel like the landing spots, even for coaches that were at historically strong programs in the ACC and the Big 12. And I think that's, he's built up Iowa State. Kansas State is another team that I think gets kind of thrown around where it's like, well, this coach has had such success. When's he going to move on from Kansas State? And you kind of wonder, do they have to?
Right. I think that playoff picture indicates that you do.
Yes.
Like, there is a world where South Carolina is a more prestigious job than Kansas State.
Yeah. No, I absolutely. I do think you're right. And I think the name that I always end up hearing when I'm listening to a lot of other college football podcasts is talking about James Franklin and Penn State.
Yes.
And is Penn State going to be satisfied with that in the long run? Are they going to be, are they fine always being kind of a second fiddle?
Right.
In that conference? People throw out Matt Campbell sometimes for that. And obviously James Franklin also, his name gets thrown around for other coaching jobs because his agent is doing the work.
Well, I mean, with how many off seasons people have predicted that he would be fired, you have to.
Yes.
You got to be ready to land your guy somewhere new every
Absolutely.
offseason.
And like James Franklin, it ends up just being Matt Campbell that gets thrown around too. And so I do think that you get a good. I think if you get a Big 12 championship out of him, that could be the way that he leaves.
Yeah. So how does UC stop that from happening?
I think this is going to be a game that is an offensive attack. I think you want to outscore Iowa State more so than you're going to try to stop Iowa State from scoring.
Okay, track me.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, okay, you can go get that field goal. We're going to bomb it down the field and score. We're going to break through with Corey Kiner, things like that. And
the heart and the soul of the old Big 12.
Yes, absolutely. Rest in peace, Mike Leach. That air raid offense that he brought to Texas Tech that arguably made Patrick Mahomes a strong name. where they were just drop. They would have games where it's like 70 points to 63 points. You're just like, all right, yeah, just keep going, whatever.
Yeah, what was the Cliff and Pat game where it was? 60s?
Oh, it was 70s to 60s, something like that.
Yeah, I can't remember who they were playing. But
was that Arizona State?
It might have been.
I think it was back then.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and so that those, and that's again, that's the kind of ball I love to watch.
Backyard ball. You like the gun
video game ball.
Yeah, exactly. You switch it to arcade. You drop that difficulty down one, and you just have a good time.
You go. I want to have fun. We're gonna play on freshman setting, and I played NCAA 2005 for most of my childhood, and I think I have games where it's like 120 to 14, if the CPU scored that many. But so this game has arguably conference implications. So I want to take a minute, and probably more than just one, to kind of talk about the conferences with you.
Yeah, of course.
So we're gonna have a little fun here. We're gonna talk, and we're gonna do some drawing. Everybody's favorite thing.
Okay.
So let me make sure I'm doing this right. Yeah. Okay. So let's start with the Big 12.
All right.
Where you have BYU right now is honestly pretty fairly locked in.
Right.
They are 6-0 in conference, 9-0 overall.
Got the close one against Utah. So and that was, I don't want to say their last big test, but that was the one that you have to get done to feel pretty comfortable about the remainder.
Yes, you have Kansas left, you have Arizona State left, and you have Houston left.
Okay, then maybe I am all right to say that was the last big test.
I mean, Arizona State, I think, is one more test. But by the time you get to them, if you've already beaten Kansas, it doesn't matter.
And Dillingham's a bit of a lightning in the bottle kind of guy out at Arizona State. Yeah, sorry, you keep.
No, I'll keep drawing while you talk.
Dillingham, with at least what I know from him, it's that offensive craziness that you more or less have to worry about, and that's something I feel like BYU can contain. I know Kalani Sitake has been a phenomenal coach. So I would go as far to say is we can pretty much pencil in BYU as your Big 12 winners for now, but you still have the other half of the conference title game to figure out here.
Yes, and so Colorado is the front runner right now for that second half. They are 5-1, 7-2 overall. Then you have four more teams. You have Kansas State, Iowa State, Arizona State, and West Virginia, all 4-2.
Okay.
So I was looking at ESPN's Football Power Index.
Okay.
They give percentages of chances to win the national championship, chances to win the conference, chances to make the playoffs, things like that. Mm-hmm. Just looking at the conference predictions, BYU 40% chance right now that they could. I believe it was a win, and to me,
40% on a win is more like 75 on a make it.
Exactly, and then you have Colorado next up, 32%.
Okay.
Colorado has Utah, Kansas, Oklahoma State.
Ooh. Okay.
Oklahoma State hasn't been beaten a Big 12 team this year.
Nope.
Kansas hasn't looked good.
Right.
Probably.
I mean,
that's why we talked about BYU.
Right.
If BYU can, I think if Colorado can beat them, I think BYU can beat them as well.
Yes.
So at that point, you have 7-1. Utah may be a toss-up. Mm-hmm. We can call it.
Let's call it 7-2 just for the fun of it.
Yes. I like that.
Just for the off chance there.
At BYU, we can even say they throw a game at ASU. Mm-hmm. 8-1.
Okay. Yeah.
So
deal.
7-2, 8-1. Let's talk about Kansas State. You've got Arizona State. You've got UC. Mm-hmm. You've got Iowa State. Mm-hmm. All teams that are kind of fighting for things right here. UC is sitting at 3-3. Is something to remember as well.
Right. But has a chance to at least tie up with Iowa State this weekend at 4-3.
They have Iowa State. They have Kansas State. They just beat West Virginia.
Yep.
If West Virginia has a Baylor, a UCF, and a Texas Tech left.
Okay. Yeah.
I think Tech could be a team that beats them. I think UCF could pull something out.
Well, and Aranda's coaching for his job at this point.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
That's still a game you got to sweat.
And so I think those are three tight games that we'll say for the sake of argument, WVU falls off.
Okay.
You still have ASU. They have Kansas State.
Yep.
They have BYU.
Yep.
Sketched up as a loss. And then they have Arizona.
All right.
and Arizona hasn't. Arizona State's been the Arizona team this year, basically.
Right. Which is with Noah Fafita and McMillan out there. Who'd have thought that, right?
And so I think that's a question of can they beat this Kansas State team? But UC is also playing that Kansas State team,
right?
So
yeah,
it's all this like it's so many.
Got that and that still.
Yes.
Like you said, just beat West Virginia, and then who was the other one you said that's still on the UC schedule?
TCU, okay. Kansas State, Iowa State. So both of these still have to play UC. So there's a chance.
You went out.
Say in a best situation, UC ends up 6-3 at the end of the year. That means Kansas State, Iowa State are both at least 6-3.
Right.
Would fall underneath them, so they're moving up above that. We'll say. What did we say with West Virginia?
So they're 4-2, right? West Virginia is.
Yes.
So they do still have to drop one, even though UC has beat them.
Yes.
Okay.
But like we said, that might be the Texas Tech game, and then you have Arizona playing this Kansas State and arguably likely losing that BYU game. The best they would end up is at 6-3. Now that would be, I believe, and then that breaks into other tiebreakers that I don't have all the details on.
That becomes a hairy situation, but really we're just focusing on what UC can do to get into those.
Yes.
And it seems like they pretty much control their destiny.
Yes, and so you want to watch what Arizona State's doing, but for the most part, it's up to UC to say we can close out this season and we can get at least close to a Colorado and a BYU who don't have the toughest schedules, but anything can happen
exactly.
in this league. So that, let me, how do we reset this one?
Oh.
Nope. Okay. So let's scratch all this off real quick.
We have commercials we can send to.
And I wish.
Not quite there yet.
Please sponsor if you want to fill our commercial time. So next up is the Big Ten, though. And the Big Ten is a little bit clearer right now because you have a lot more teams who are going to be playing each other. Because I think that's one thing that you run into with the Big 12 with how many teams there are right now. You're just going to end up not playing each other.
Yeah.
So let's look at that. So I'm going to have this listed in order of ESPN's projections of who's likely to win the conference.
Okay.
And you'll notice who I'm putting up first. Ohio State.
Yep.
Then you have Oregon.
Okay, yep.
Then you have IU. And then you have Penn State.
Okay.
So this is a fun one. In conference, Oregon, IU, 7-0.
Right.
Ohio State, Penn State, both 5-1.
Okay.
Obviously, Penn State has the loss to Ohio State.
Ohio State has the loss to Oregon.
Yes.
Right.
Oregon has left Wisconsin and UW.
Okay.
Two UWs, arguably.
Yes.
IU.
Arguably. Per sources.
IU has Ohio State and likely a win in the old Oaken bucket. As much as it pains me to say it, I am also realistic. Not many people expected IU to be a 10-win team this year, let alone be this competitive for the college playoff.
Right.
Ohio State, Northwestern this weekend. Then they play IU, and then they play Michigan.
Okay, yeah, right.
Which this Michigan team has not been the same that we've seen in the last few years. I think at this point, and then I'll add with Penn State, likely a win against Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland.
Okay.
Now, this is where I do think things get interesting. I think it's going to be hard for Penn State to really be competitive. No. Right now, they have a 3.6% chance of going to conference or going for the conference title.
Yes. To be honest, I'd be okay to just put a line through.
Yeah,
you know what
go
I mean?
for it.
Just because, like you said, you've already lost to Ohio State. With this game, like I know Wisconsin, nothing to scoff at.
Nope.
University of Washington, still nothing to scoff at. Not Oregon.
Neither of them are Oregon.
Right.
If Oregon doesn't go undefeated this year, I would be surprised. In regular season, specifically.
Right, and especially getting past Ohio State rather.
Yes.
And call me crazy, but those two right there feel like pretty automatic W's to me.
Yes.
Like, even with Michigan being Michigan, the rivalry game, all that. So that would leave them at 7. That would leave them at 7-1. Take Penn State out, and now you're just looking at those three.
And it matters specifically to not this weekend, but next weekend when Ohio State and Indiana play.
Right.
And that'll be. That's the prove it time.
Of course.
If Ohio State can't beat IU, IU becomes likely an undefeated challenger to Oregon for the Big Ten championship game. Mm-hmm. But B, do you keep Ohio State in the playoff?
At 2 losses, considering it was to 2 undefeateds, you have to.
Okay.
Especially knowing that 4 of those spots are currently earmarked for Big Ten teams.
Yes, and I think also, I was going to say, and also looking at like the SEC, at least where it's been more recently, you have teams that are eating each other,
right?
In a way,
that
I think you can't necessarily fault Ohio State for that.
Well, right. I mean, you look at the teams that are representing the SEC right now in that college football playoff picture. It's a 2-loss Georgia team. It is a 2-loss Ole Miss team. It is a 1-loss Tennessee team. Like it's 1-loss Bama team. Like those teams should not have losses. You know what I'm saying? Like in most normal years, we would have a couple SEC teams that are still undefeated right now, but it's because, like you said, top to bottom, it's been a situation of cannibalism.
Yes. And now let's move on. This is one more that will not have college football playoff implications.
Okay.
But it's my favorite.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yep.
We're talking MAC.
Yes.
Because the MAC, I think, ended up a lot more interesting than people might have expected it to this year. We'll leave the Big Ten up just for fun.
Yeah.
We'll label it.
That'd be a nice little side attraction here.
So let's talk about the MAC.
Okay.
You have Miami.
Yes.
Is right now a front runner for winning the conference, according to ESPN's Football Power Index.
Okay.
Then you have Bowling Green, Bowling Green State, followed by Toledo, followed by Ohio. We've got a couple Bobcats here. Shout out to them. And then you have some spoilers, because really it's these 4 are your big competitors. But then you have Western Michigan and you have Buffalo, which neither are teams to scoff at. But I also think the way that things line up, they need more to happen up here.
Well, and they're not probably getting to here and here. They can just cause a lot of disorganization here.
It's a lot. Well, and that's the thing is that a lot of these, Miami will play BGSU. That's the end of the year.
Right.
If BGSU or Miami make mistakes the weeks before, that frees up space for these teams to slide up.
Yeah.
And so I think we're still far enough out that it is worth it that this may happen. Both of those are at 4.7 and 3.6% chances.
Okay.
Just to kind of put that into perspective, we'll do it British and put a comma in there. But now the rest of these teams, double-digit chances.
Okay.
Miami, 28%.
Yeah. Here, you can read the numbers.
I'll read you.
For you.
27 for Bowling Green.
Okay.
18.8 for UT.
What did you say?
18.8.
18.8.
And then 18 for Ohio.
18. Teamwork makes the dream work.
Yes. Now let's look at remaining schedules, because Miami playing Kent State this week. Kent State 0-9. Obviously, you can't always just chalk up a win, but it feels like a game that it's a game that Miami should win, and that Miami needs to win.
It's not optional at this point.
Yes. Then they'll play Northern Illinois the week before they play Bowling Green.
All right.
So it's interesting, though, because then Bowling Green is playing Western Michigan, playing Ball State, another team that hasn't been doing too hot in the MAC. Miami did beat them. And if both of them win out, you have 6-1 Miami and 6-1 Bowling Green State.
Untouched.
Untouched.
That's your conference title.
Bowling Green has a win over Toledo.
Okay.
Well, and it's not even necessarily that. This is going into the final week,
Okay.
6-1.
Oh, okay. I got you. Sorry.
Bowling Green State has a win over UT. UT plays Central Michigan, Ohio, and Akron. UT beats Ohio, knocks Ohio out of competition. Even if UT wins out and say Bowling Green loses to Miami at the end,
They would still hold that tiebreaker.
they hold that tiebreaker. Exactly.
Yeah. So if all 4 of these teams win out beyond 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, this is how your conference is set.
You could end up with a 7-1 Miami, a 6-2 Bowling Green, a 6-2 Toledo, and OU is playing Eastern Michigan, Toledo, and Ball State.
So 5 and 3, right?
Yes, 5-3
Yeah, with the loss to Toledo.
with a loss to Toledo in that.
And of course, you can just switch these in your head. You know, if like let's say you think Bowling Green State's beating Miami, just switch those numbers.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Now, but then that would make things more interesting because UT has a win over Miami,
Okay.
so UT would move up, and then say.
So
I don't
Bowling Green
think
State
the
really
highest
should have the highest percentage here. In theory.
I think it is. I will say this. I think it is specifically because Miami is playing Kent State.
Right.
That the analytics see that as more of a likely win.
Yeah.
That there's a chance Bowling Green does lose to this Western Michigan team.
Yeah, and like these are the numbers in terms of like the high. But if
Yes.
all of these teams perform the worst that they possibly can, Bowling Green State is the safest.
Yes. That's what you're saying, and yes, I agree. That makes. Sorry, I wasn't thinking about how you were
They've
thinking
got
about
the
it.
parachute in this situation.
Yes.
Whereas
Absolutely.
all these other teams, now don't get me granted, the parachute still might have some holes in it, but they should feel the safest that you possibly can in a situation where there's 4 teams decided by less than 10% from top to bottom as far as who's going to make this conference title game.
Yes, and so that's why as much as I know a lot of college football fans out there love the Big Ten, love SEC, love your Power 4 conferences.
Yeah.
This is the kind of conference play stuff that I love to watch, and if you don't have your eyes on the MAC and some of these G5 squads, it's not going to matter for what comes with a national championship, what comes with deciding who the best team in all of college football is. But for teams like this, and we saw this with Miami last year when they won that championship, this is important to these players. And to these schools and to these alumni. And I think that's beautiful.
Well, and I would argue a lot of times these matchups and these rivalry games do mean more.
Yes.
To steal the SEC's catchphrase. Like, for example, I grew up 30 minutes away from Arkansas State University. The early part of my college football fandom was spent watching a lot of Sun Belt football. I did not grow up on the MAC, but I wish I did. Because this conference is constant chaos. You never know what's going to happen. And every game, even though the atmospheres might not be quite what you want because you're playing on some of those weird days, or maybe that talent level isn't up to the Bamas and Georgias and whatevers of the world,
Yes.
You can feel the importance every time you watch these games.
Absolutely.
And so, to see the conference shake out like this at the end just makes it all that much better.
Yeah. And so again, keep an eye on the MAC.
Yes.
You're going to have one more week of weekday games.
As you should have been anyways. You should have been watching action. What else do you have to watch on Tuesday?
What do you have on Tuesday, Wednesday, huh?
Come on.
Besides Fox 19 Now.
What are we doing? Now, before we wrap this whole ordeal up, you did have another piece of news you wanted to talk about, right?
Yes. Let's sit on back down here.
Yeah, of course.
We'll leave that up behind us.
Get the chair back in here.
We did want to give a shout out to the UC women's basketball team. Jillian Hayes was named the Big 12 Player of the Week. She's the first Bearcat to win a weekly Big 12 honor in the program history. Now, obviously, that hasn't been that long that UC has been in the Big 12, but to be that first and hopefully start a continuation of that is important. She had a double-double across 2 wins, 20 points and 11 rebounds per game, shot 61% from the field.
Okay. Yeah.
That's good numbers.
I'm about to
So.
say you have to have a first at some point. So congratulations there.
And
And
she was one of two to record multiple double doubles during the first week of the season for two Big 12 players. Excuse me,
okay,
tied for the most among players nationally. So,
perfect.
congrats to her.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. One more team that we wanted to give a shout out to this week is the Indian Hills boys soccer team,
Yes.
getting a Division III state championship. A big accomplishment. We had a number of state volleyball champions come in this weekend as well. We were able to sit down and talk with the boys soccer coach, hear about this big win. So we had a number of state championship teams this weekend, including the Indian Hills boys soccer team. Joining me now is head coach Brian Daniel. Brian, thank you for talking with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's look a little bit back at the season. You guys were able to play in the state championship and win it. When did it really start feeling like this team had what it takes to get there and win the trophy?
Um, it's a great question. I think uh, we came into this season knowing that we had to replace quite a few players from last year's team, which was an immensely talented squad as well. And I knew coming into the season, we knew that we had all the components of a championship caliber team. Um, but we knew we had some big question marks in terms of certain positions that we had to fill. And we knew that certain guys that didn't play huge roles last year were going to have to step up into much larger roles. And so I would say we knew that the potential was there even going into the season. We looked at that first 5 games and said, okay, we play a tough schedule right out of the gate. And if we can win several out of our first few, then I think that gives us a good measuring stick as to where we're headed. And the fast forward 5 games in, we were undefeated and hadn't conceded a goal in the run of play, and that was one of those moments where I think we kind of looked around and said, okay, well, let's see how the season unfolds. And to play the schedule we play and to finish the season undefeated as state champions, I don't know that anybody in the community would have necessarily had that on their 2024 bingo card, but it was really I think the belief built every game. We play quality opponents and we had really good results against them, and I think somewhere around mid-season, the boys kind of started to look at each other and say, "Hey, I think this could be really special." And it was almost a moment of, okay, let's make sure we do everything in our power to keep it going. And I think that it was something that across the board we knew the potential was there from the beginning, and they just needed to execute. And I think we got there a little quicker in terms of gelling and figuring out roles than we were expecting as a coaching staff.
Okay, and you talked about those first 5 wins where you went, oh, we're 5-0. Okay, now what do we do from here? And when those players start looking at each other and saying, hey, this could be our time. Was there a win in particular that really stood out to you of, wow, my guys did it?
It wasn't in that first 5, but it was there was I forget exactly how far into the season it was exactly, but we faced Carroll out of Dayton
Mhm.
and Archbishop Carroll, and they're a prolific team, very well seasoned, very well coached, and they always have a lot of talent. And historically, they've gotten the better of our matchup. And at their place last year, we came from behind to beat them 5-4 in a barn burner of a comeback. And so we knew they were coming in fired up. And at the time, they came into that game ranked number 1 in the state in our division, and we were number 2. So it was a really high profile matchup. And the boys, it was actually homecoming weekend, which sometimes can be a bit of a distraction. And our guys came out locked in, and we jumped on them early, and we ended up winning the game 5-0. And that was the game where I think everybody looked around, and I got a lot of texts from other coaches in the community, and we know some of our big rivals were there watching that game. And I think the ripple effect from that game was pretty pronounced in terms of how it changed the perception both outside and within our community about what this team could do.
And you keep mentioning the community. Have you seen a large outpouring of support from other students from families and things like that in the community coming out to games this year?
Oh yeah, for sure. Indian Hill's a really tight knit community, and it's a smaller school, and so everybody knows everybody, for better or worse, and so I think they support each other. And if you go to the football games on Friday night, you'll see half of my soccer guys, shirts off, chest painted in the front row of the student section, cheering on their buddies who are football players. And when you go to the volleyball matches, it's a lot of the same. And so it's really awesome to see the student outpouring. The boys and girls soccer programs do a particularly good job of supporting one another, and that they line the fence and they're there to cheer on the guys, and our guys show up and represent for the ladies. But I think even beyond just the student body, I think as the tournament progressed, I was really struck by just how much this meant to the community. I would say our school has a tradition of well-respected soccer programs. Coach Mees was there before me for 29 years, and then Coach Vocal before him, and just the reputation, I think, of our programs, and I think to see the way that the community turned out as we progressed through the tournament. Alumni, families that didn't have high school students, friends from our neighborhood. There was just a ton of outpouring of this emotional support for what these boys were achieving game in, game out. And as the stakes got higher, the crowds got bigger, and it was a lot of fun to see and hear because the environment was just amazing for the guys as we went through the tournament.
That's great. I always love seeing, especially for a high school program of any sport, you just get when you get those fans that come in who don't really have a connection to any player or things like that. They just want to come and support growing athletes.
Yeah.
So let's look ahead now. Looking at next year, you mentioned that with this year you had to add some new players, fill in some holes that were left from graduates. As you're looking ahead towards next year, are you keeping a lot of the same players? Are you going to be looking to fill those holes again?
Yeah, our philosophy as a coaching staff and as a program is we don't ever want to be in a place where we have to totally rebuild and revamp what we do. And I think this year's success is a testament to the strength and the quality of our coaching staff. Our JV coach, Mike Fry, who's also a director over at King's Hammer, he does such an amazing job of preparing his JV guys to make the jump to varsity. And I think that was on full display this year. We had 2 starters in our back line that weren't on the varsity roster last year. And they stepped in and played in most games, probably 70 or more minutes as starters in key positions on a team that went undefeated and won the state championship. And in addition to those guys, we had 3 or 4 other guys who were significant players in our rotation that were also on the JV team last year. And we had multiple guys that didn't really see significant roles on last year's varsity team. And I think next year we look to do the same. I think we obviously lose some very high profile, high quality players. But that was true last year as well. I think the mentality is that as these seniors move on, the culture is bigger than a graduating class. And the sophomores, we had 7 sophomores that were on the varsity roster all season. We had an additional 6 guys that trained with the varsity team that were freshmen and sophomores that trained with the varsity team during the tournament. And those guys were on the bench for every one of those tournament wins. And so to get to see and feel and hear what that looks like and what that environment is and see what it means, not just to the guys on the field, but the guys on the bench and the people in the stands. That's something that has a lasting impression. And when you see programs that have sustained success, in the soccer landscape. I think a lot of that has to do with having those initial teams that help pave the way. And if you look at our record over the last several years, each year we've progressed a little farther in the tournament. And that was one of our goals this year, is to go farther in the tournament and make a deeper run than we did last year. And once we got to that point, we kind of recalibrated and said, okay, let's set our sights on something bigger. And I think that the only way to do that is to reload and help those guys that had smaller roles understand how to bridge the gap between their role the previous season and what the team needs of them.
Well, I'm sure they will be working very hard in the off season to keep up and continue this success.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one thing. We have some amazing kids who really put in the work, and it's just been really, really special to see the years of work come to fruition for this group of guys that are graduating now as state champs.
Well, exactly. That's what you want to see as a coach, I imagine.
Yeah.
I want to say congratulations to you and all of your athletes. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up here today?
No, I appreciate you taking the time to chat. I think I can't say enough about our coaching staff, but also our community, the soccer community, the players, and the support that we get from our families. In addition to that, the administrators, Brian Phelps as our athletic director, and the time and energy and what he puts into helping us build these programs for our athletes, and all of our administrators and their focus on making sure we have the facilities, the resources, and everything that we need. It's truly made Indian Hill a special place, not just athletically, but academically and the arts. So much so that after my second year of teaching and coaching at Indian Hill, we actually moved into the district so that my own two daughters could benefit from the programming. So I just feel really blessed to be a part of it. I'm really humbled and honored to get to go into battle that one last time with these guys. And I can't wait to see how next year's team builds on this year's team's success.
Hey, we'll be watching that along with, I'm sure, the community as well. So thank you very much for your time. We'll head back inside.
All right. Thanks.
All right. And that is all that we have for this week of 19 on the clock. Be sure to tune in for final quarters, for sports wraps. Our sports team is always on top of everything happening, both pro, college, and high school here in the tri-state. Anything you want to say to the people, Jackson?
No, just congratulations, again to Indian Hill, and just make sure to keep on, follow us on YouTube. We're up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts now, so you can check us out there as well if you just want the audio version. And make sure to come back next week when we've got even more high school results to talk about, maybe another closer look at the conferences again, depending on how things start to shake out. We're going to keep you in the loop with all of it.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next week.
Have a good one.